Climate change, without a doubt, is warming up the oceans. And oceans are where big storms get their energy from. So the warmer the ocean is, the more deadlier, the more violent these sorts of storms are. Now, the best studies we have, which the IPCC, the big Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, put out more recently, said that in the North Atlantic, at least, we know that warming sea temperatures really do contribute to more violent storms. And it would be reasonable then to assume that the same holds for the Pacific, where, to be honest, there aren't that many good studies.
Right, and I want to bring up that emotional speech that we heard from the head of the Philippines delegation at UN climate talks in Warsaw, Poland. He said he would stop eating until participants made meaningful progress, he said, and he believes that decisions can be made to stop what he calls the madness of the climate crisis. What does he mean by that?
Well, you really have to feel for him. I mean, it was clear that this was something that was deeply personal. His own brother was literally pulling out, dead people. He didn't know about the safety of his relatives. Look, we've been talking about climate change for an awful long time. The scientific consensus has been extraordinarily clear on this. I mean, almost nothing we have ever done in human progress has had this many scientists with this amount of study saying that, look, this is what the future holds. And yet we are stuck in the blame game, in the finger pointing, and waiting for one nation to act before the other. We are an extraordinarily lucky generation because we're the first generation in the history of humanity who can actually see what's coming down the pipe. We can actually see what's coming down next week, next month, certainly in 100 years. And if we refuse to act and take precautions now, then, who else can you blame but ourselves?
So what can we do?
I think that's what he was going on about.
But what can we do? How can the problem of climate change be reduced? Is it possible?
What you can do is two things. One, you can certainly stop making it worse. And the second thing is we can do things to adapt to the changes that we're already seeing. So without a doubt, we got to get a grips on carbon emissions. Coal and methane being the big contributors to carbon and methane emissions that contribute to climate change. So we have to get some kind of global agreement on a cap on carbon at some level. The second thing we have to do is just start adapting to issues that are happening right now. That means sea level rise, temperature changes, which we can do through replanting mangroves, to restoring coral reefs, and to making our cities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So these are two big things that we really need to start working on right away.
So how likely is it that the Philippines, and of course other vulnerable coastal areas, will see more of these super typhoons?
Look, Philippines was number 3 on the global list of places that are in a really bad spot when it comes to climate change. They sit on the western edge of the Pacific Ocean. The big storms that come through really come right at the Philippines. They also have development along the coast. People build in low-lying areas, so then they're vulnerable. And thirdly, sea level rise, which no one is talking that much about with Haiyan, but is a big factor. Sea level rise is happening in the Philippines, in the oceans around the Philippines, greater than almost anywhere else on Earth. And what happens with sea level rise is when a storm comes in, you get this, what's called a storm surge. You should actually really call it a tsunami, because that's what it is. It's a giant wave or series of waves that inundate, and that's what ends up killing people. Are the Philippines likely to see super typhoons in the future? Absolutely. They've had 3 this year alone. They've had over a couple of dozen in the last year. They are going to see them. And the other thing is, look, every decade, the Philippines, the record for the fastest wind speeds of these super typhoons has been getting higher and higher and higher. In the 50s, it was around 220, 230 kilometers an hour. Now we're talking 350 kilometers an hour wind speed. And that means there's a huge storm surge that comes along with it.